All right, we're here today to talk a little bit about game theory, and hopefully, you've watched the little YouTube video from the game show before we started this video. And what did we learn from that video? Well, we saw that Steve and Sarah were both interdependent agents. They were both interested in what the decision of the other was going to be. And why was that? Well, if they needed to try to figure out whether the other was going to split or whether the other was going to steal. And so we see this in oligopoly industries, in industries where there are just several producers. They're interested in the decisions of their competitors. Will the competitor raise the price? Will they lower their price? Will they increase their output? Will they decrease their output? So the decision of the one impacts the other. We can see that the firms have an interest in making the industry as large as possible, but they also have a competing industry to make their share of the industry the largest. They also have an interest in figuring or anticipating what the response of the other is going to be. And these decisions are not always perfect. And we could see that from Steve and Sarah in the video in the Golden Balls game show. So you saw that they both had an interest in figuring out what the other did. They also had an interest in talking to each other to try to gauge what the other was going to do and actually confirm what the other was going to do. We would call that collusion in a business setting, where two firms get together and maybe decide to both raise their prices, or they get together and they decide to restrict the output of their product in order to raise the price of their product. Collusion in the United States would be illegal because they're acting as a monopoly, but firms have an interest to collude. And you can also see that firms also have an interest to cheat on the collusion. Sarah's an example to that. Sarah cheated on the collusion when she chose to steal. And so we're going to see a little bit of that in some of our studies here today about game theory. So imagine for a moment, it's during the Stalinist era of Russia after World War II, and a Russian music conductor is studying Tchaikovsky's musical score on the train to Minsk. And he's arrested by the KGB, and he's thrown into prison for 3 days, and he's told absolutely nothing. And then in his interrogation, they tell him, "We have your friend Tchaikovsky," and he's starting to talk. Should the music conductor confess? Well, here's the situation. Here's what the conductor knows. The conductor knows that if both of them confess, they each get 8 years. The music conductor also knows that if they both don't confess, they each get 1 year. That looks pretty good. But remember, they're not able to negotiate with one another. They're being interrogated in separate rooms. Okay? He also knows that if he confesses, but Tchaikovsky doesn't, then he gets to go free and Tchaikovsky will get 20 years. And vice versa. Over here, if he doesn't confess, but Tchaikovsky does confess, then he's going to get 20 years. The conductor will get 20 years, but Tchaikovsky will get to go free. So what should he do? Pause the video for a moment, and I want you to try to think about what the best solutions are for the conductor and what are the best solutions here for Tchaikovsky, and try to figure out what these two individuals who are going to do who are being interrogated in separate rooms. Here's what we think may happen. The conductor is going to be sitting in his cell, and he's going to say to himself, boy, what if Tchaikovsky confesses? If Tchaikovsky confesses, what should I do? Well, I obviously should confess. If I think he's going to confess, it'd be my best decision to confess. What if Tchaikovsky doesn't confess? What if Tchaikovsky's going to choose not to confess? Well, then it would be in my best interest as the conductor to confess. So I think to myself, it really doesn't matter what Tchaikovsky does. If Tchaikovsky confesses, I should confess. If he doesn't confess, I should confess. So I probably should confess. How about Tchaikovsky? Tchaikovsky is in his cell and he's thinking, What if the conductor confesses? Well, if I confess, I get 8 years. I don't confess, I get 20. I better confess. And then he thinks, well, what if the conductor doesn't confess? And he thinks, well, same thing again. I should confess. So he also has a dominant, what we call a dominant strategy. This is a dominant strategy. It doesn't matter what the conductor does. Tchaikovsky thinks to himself, it's best for me to confess. So they both end up confessing. They both have an interest to confess. It's where their best strategies align, is to confess. It's not the best outcome. The best outcome is for them both not to confess. But they end up having their best strategies aligning where they both confess. So it's a likely outcome, what we call a Nash equilibrium. Okay, so they both get 8 years, even though they, if they had cooperated, they would have gotten off with 1 year. What would the conductor and Tchaikovsky decide if they could negotiate? Now, if they could negotiate, it kind of makes sense that they would both choose to not not confess. But even if they had negotiated to don't confess down here to get a year, they each also would be motivated to cheat on the other. Because if just one of them cheats, they get to go free. All right? So this is a typical prisoner's dilemma. So think of the game theory steps. What did we go through here? We started by identifying their best strategies. What is your best response if the other player does whatever? So that's where we were marking the X's on the diagram. We were marking their best strategies. What should I do if this other person does blah, blah, blah? That's a best strategy. Then we looked to see if there was a dominant strategy. A dominant strategy was a strategy that was going to be the strategy that they were going to go with no matter what the other person did, meaning their best strategy was aligned. It was always, in this case, always to confess. Okay, so that because their best strategy was to always confess, then it meant that that strategy was dominant. A Nash equilibrium is when both players have a best strategy that coordinates with the other. They did have a Nash equilibrium where both of them, where they each had a best strategy that was for confessing. And so that was a Nash equilibrium. Both players, when you're in a Nash equilibrium, both players can say, that is the best I could have done given what the other guy just did. So a Nash equilibrium is not the best outcome. A Nash equilibrium, if you end up in the Nash equilibrium, hindsight says that's the best I could have done given what the other guy just did. So is it the best outcome? Not always. It can be the best outcome. In some situations, it might also be the best solution, but not always. Sometimes it's not always the best solution. So let's look here. We have two steakhouses in South Philadelphia, Sal and Pat, and their daily profits are listed in the box below for their sandwiches, steak sandwiches. If Sal and Pat both sell for $4, they each have a profit of $500. If they both sell for $5, they'll have each have profits of $425. And you can see if one sells for what happens here. If one sells for $5, one sells for $4. These are their outcomes then. So we're going to mark this box with X's for Sal and O's for Pat. So if you want to pause this video for a moment because you think you are good at this and you're starting to understand it, even if you're not great, try to think for a moment mark the best strategies. X's for Sal and O's for Pat. All right, Good to have you back. So Sal, let's pretend to be Pat. Let's pretend we are Pat here. And so Pat says, I think, what should I do if Sal sells for $4? Well, then my best strategy would be to sell for $4 as well, because 500 is greater than 400. And that's how you would say it, the best strategy. Why is that my best strategy? That is my best strategy when he sells for $4, when Sal sells for $4, because I would have a daily profit of 500 rather than a daily profit of 400. What is my Pat says, what is my best strategy if Sal sells for $5? I could sell for 4 and get a profit of 600, or sell for 5 and get a profit of 425. So my best strategy would be to sell for 4. Then Sal does the same. Sal says, what if Pat sells for $4? Well, I could sell for $4 and get a profit of 500. I could sell for $5 and get a profit of 400. My best strategy is to sell for 4. And then same again. What should he do if Pat sells for $5? He could have a profit of 600 or a profit of 425. So he should sell for 4. All right. Now we can see certain things here. These are their best strategies. We have identified their best strategies. Now we say, are there any dominant strategies? Yes. In fact, both players have a dominant strategy here. This is the prisoner's dilemma again. They both have a dominant strategy. Sal's dominant strategy is to sell for $4. No matter what Pat does, his best strategy is always to sell for 4. Pat also has a dominant strategy. His dominant strategy is to sell for $4. No matter what Sal does, his best strategy is always to sell for $4. Is there a Nash equilibrium? Yes, there is a Nash equilibrium here. It's where their best strategies align. Well, we have 4 different boxes here, right? And in only one of the 4 boxes, and only in one of these 4 here, do their best strategies align. And that's where they both sell for 4. So the Nash equilibrium for this is for both of them to sell for 4. And they both would have a profit of 500. Which is also it's one of the best outcomes in this particular game theory in this matrix. So in this way, it's also a good outcome. Let's look at another one of these. Dominic and Tony, pizza shop. Their choice is to set their pricing high, medium, or low. And so again, I want you to pause and I want you to identify the best strategies for Dominic, and then identify the best strategies for Tony, and see if they're on this. All right, so you must be back, and let's look at Dominic and look at his best strategies. So Dominic, we're going to mark Dominic's best strategies here with an X. And we're going to say, so Dominic says to himself, if Tony goes high, what should I do? The second number is his profit. So he's looking at the second number here, 60, 70, or 35. Well, I would want a profit of 70, so I should choose a medium price strategy. If Tony goes medium, 36, 50, 35. Looking almost dominant. Is it going to be dominant? Let's see. What if Tony goes low, however? If Tony goes low, then Dominic's best strategy is actually to go high, 36, versus 30 versus 25. So we can see here that Dominic does not have a dominant strategy. We would say sometimes he will go medium, sometimes he would go high, depending upon what Tony's going to do. He's almost dominant, but he's not dominant. How about Tony? Tony says, what if Dominic goes high? And remember, Tony's numbers are the first numbers in the box. So he goes 6, I could go high for 60, medium for 70, low for 35. So he thinks, I'll go medium. And he says, what if Dominic goes medium? I'll go medium. What if Dominic goes low? Well, I should go high. And again, we would say, well, now Tony also does not have a dominant strategy. These are his best strategies, and his best strategy is not always the same. Sometimes Tony would go medium, sometimes Tony would go high, depending upon what Dominic does. Now, is there a Nash equilibrium? Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 potentials for Nash equilibrium. There are 9 potentials for Nash equilibrium in here. One for each of the 9 boxes in here. But there's only one Nash equilibrium for both of them to go median. Only in one place did their best strategies align. It's a likely outcome. So the Nash equilibrium here is a likely outcome. It's mostly dominant, so they're probably thinking that they both would go medium, and they both end up with a daily profit of 50. And here we can see a daily profit of 50, however, is not the best outcome. They could collude and both choose to go high, which isn't even one of their best strategies. But if these 2 pizza places could collude, they would choose to go high. Then would one of them want to cheat? And yes, they both would want to cheat. If they get in a room and both decide to go high, when they leave the room, they're going to say, wow, I'm going to let the other guy go high, and then I'm going to go medium. If just one of them steps out of the collusion, if Dominic is the only one to step out of the collusion, and Tony sticks with the collusion, then Dominic will get they'll be here, and Dominic will get a profit of 70. If they collude and they go back out and Dominic sticks with the collusion, and Tony steps away from colluding and chooses medium, then they end up here, and Tony's profit goes up to 70. If they both cheat, then they're back to the Nash equilibrium of both getting a profit of 50. So this is game theory, and I hope that you have learned a little something from this, and follow the instructions on your sheet there, and go practice this with some questions on AP Classroom, and see you back here next class period. Have a good one.